Assalamualaikum to our panels, Madam Jamila and Madam Jaida. My name is Nurul Naim and this is my group members, Nur Syuhadah and Siti Nursyahira. So today, we would like to present our final year project entitled The Influence of Petroleum Products Consumption Towards Economic Growth in Malaysia. In the face of economic growth and the creation of country, energy now plays an important role. As the number of population is rising up, the demand for energy also consistently increases. Petroleum is one kind of energy among the others. Fuels such as petrol, paraffin, and diesel oil can be extracted and manufactured to produce. Malaysia is one of the main petroleum producers in the world, which has the major contribution towards the total gross domestic profit. There are many petroleum products such as liquefied petroleum gas, LPG, diesel, fuel oil, kerosene, motor petrol, ATF and EV gas. The consumption of these energy is growing over the years as the demand increases that cause the pace for conservation policies has set up. According to the Department of Statistics Malaysia, in 2016, the consumption of mining and quarrying grew by 0.9%. When the causality exists regarding energy usage and the gross domestic product, an economy will grow as the consumption increases. However, this also implies that energy consumption shortage can have a negative influence on economic activity. Reducing energy consumption might have a damaging impact on the economy. Energy is becoming a crucial role for a developing country. Focusing on petroleum, as Malaysia is one of the world's leading petroleum producing countries, it has contributed to the total gross domestic profit in Malaysia. At the same time, the country is now confronting a few issues as the price of global oil is falling due to the virus outbreak. The dropping of oil prices will affect the country badly as Malaysia is the main oil producing country and the economy will drop badly. According to the Star article, world oil prices dropped after hundreds of new coronavirus reported in Europe and the Middle East. Fear that the energy demand would decline, hence the falling prices. Moreover, the falling price is due to the failure of the oil producer organization of petroleum exporting countries to reach a consensus on bigger oil production cuts. The price dropped more than 30% from the usual. Hence, this study aims to highlight the relationship between petroleum products consumption and the Malaysia economic growth.
Assalamualaikum, my name is Nur Syuhadah binti Tumiran. Next, we move to research question. Firstly, is there any co-integrated relationship between petroleum products consumption and economic growth in Malaysia? And secondly, is there any existence of causality relationship between petroleum products consumption and economic growth in Malaysia? As for the research objective, first, to examine the number of co-integrated relationship between petroleum products consumption and economic growth in Malaysia. And secondly, to determine the existence of causality of petroleum products consumption and economic growth in Malaysia. For research hypothesis, our first H1 is there is an existence of co-integrated relationship between petroleum products consumption and economic growth in Malaysia. And our second H1 is there is an existence of causality of petroleum products consumption and economic growth in Malaysia. For the significance of study, energy is used in almost all sectors of the economy including manufacturing, construction, agriculture, mining and services. It is important to identify the relationship between energy consumption, especially petroleum products and economic growth in Malaysia, since demand for petroleum has increased rapidly over the year. Thus, the finding of study can provide the useful information on economic performance of Malaysia so that people and government can make the right decision for a better future. This study also can be a reference material for students who search for a similar study. For scope and limitation, this study will cover the petroleum products consumption in Malaysia. It focuses on the factors that affect the consumption of petroleum products and economic growth. All the information that used in the study is secondary data taken from 1918 to 2018. Hence, the finding and conclusion are limited to specific time. There are some limits to conduct this study, such as time constraint. This is the description of data. This research used annually data from time series category. The sample of 39 data were collected from energy consumption websites. There are 7 variables used in this study, which are GDP, LPG, diesel, fuel oil, kerosene, motor petrol, and ATF and EV gas. This is the theoretical framework designed for this research. The purpose of this theoretical framework is to illustrate the relationship between petroleum products consumption and economic growth in Malaysia.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Siti Nursyahira binti Shahrom and I will be the last presenter for this group. For method of analysis, there are 5 method analysis used in the studies, which is descriptive analysis, unit root test, Varley order selection, Johanson co-integration test, and Granger causality test. First method is descriptive analysis. The researcher chooses all variables in the form of a line chart to show the percentage distribution throughout the year. Then, we perform unit root test. Unit root test is used to test for stationary in time series. There are 4 steps to test the stationary, which is Dickey Fuller, DF, augmented Dickey Fuller, ADF, Philip Perrons, PP, and KPSS. All variables are tested using ADF and PP tests. The variable series is stationary and have a unit root test if the test is significant. Next step is var leg order selection. This step is used to determine the number of leg to be used. There are 3 criteria of var leg order selection, which is SC, AIC, and HQ. Criteria with the smallest value produce a better model. Next, we proceed with Johanson co-integration test. This method is used to determine the long run between petroleum product and economic growth. The series is co-integrated when 2 or more are combined independently, but some of their linear combination has lower order of integration. Last method is Granger causality test. This test is used to examine the causal relationship between petroleum product and economic growth. If the p-value of variable y significantly contribute to forecast the value of another x, then y has a Granger causal relationship. The flowchart of this research are as follows.
First, I will explain about the descriptive analysis. The figure above displays the Malaysia gross domestic product (GDP) at prices on 2015. Annual data from 1980 to 2018 is being analyzed. Over 39 years, it can be seen that the economic growth in Malaysia is growing steadily. A positive pattern of GDP shows that the economy in Malaysia has been on upward trajectory with average growth of 5.4% since 2010. A strong oil and gas industry in Malaysia helped to contribute the economic growth. Next, the figure above shows the consumption of LPG again years. There is an upward movement for LPG over 39 years. Over the time, the trend of LPG consumption increased dramatically in 1995 from 1994. The consumption of LPG then dropped in 1996 and inconsistently growing over years. Moreover, the figure above shows the consumption of diesel. There is a positive linear relationship between consumption of diesel over 39 years. The consumption of diesel mostly is contributed by transportation sector, where 87.9% from trucks and 5.5% from buses. Diesel is an important energy consumption in Malaysia since it plays a role as the main export. Hence, the consumption of diesel is expecting to grow over the years. Furthermore, the figure above shows the consumption of fuel oil from 1980 to 2018. Based on the figure, the graph shows that the data has the random variation. There are no pattern or cycle in the consumption of fuel oil. The consumption is growing steadily in 1998 and became unstable until 2001. However, it started to rise in 2005 from 1953 to 2,202 in 2007, and it is the highest consumption of fuel oil. The consumption then fell down until 2010 and inconsistently growing over years. Next, we move to the consumption of kerosene line graph. As we can see in the figure, there is a downward movement in the consumption of kerosene over the years from 1980 to 2018. The relationship between kerosene and GDP is growing weak since there is other alternatives for kerosene. Hence, it can be concluded that the consumption of kerosene will keep decreasing in the future. As for the consumption of motor petrol, overall it can be seen an upward trend. The consumption is growing steadily and then slightly dropped in 2011. However, it started to rise significantly from 8,155 kiloton to 10,843 kiloton in the following years. The consumption of motor petrol will continue to rise since the transportation sectors in Malaysia is flourishing. The graph shows the consumption of ATF and EV gas. As we can see, the consumption of ATF and AV gas, which is increasing as the year increases. Hence, it shows that there is an upward trend. The consumption of ATF and AV gas reached its peak on 2017. The usage of ATF and AV gas will keep increasing over the years as the demand of the gas increases. Next, we will move to the result of unit root test. Augmented decufuller and Phillips Perron test will be used to test the stationary of variables. As we can see from the table, all variables are not stationary at level using ADF test. Since all variables are not stationary at level, all variables need to further with first difference so that it can be difference uniformly. At first difference for variable GDP and motor petrol, null hypothesis is failed to be rejected since the p-value is greater than 0.05. Hence, GDP and motor petrol is not stationary and has a unit root test. All variables, excluding motor petrol, are stationary at second difference. The result shows that the p-value for motor petrol is greater than 0.05. Hence, ADF test cannot be used for this unit root test since the variable motor petrol are not stationary at level, first difference, and second difference. Since one of the variable is not stationary with ADF test, the stationary test is then proceed with Phillips Perron test. As shown in the table above, all the variables are not stationary at level since the p-value is greater than 0.05. Again, all variables are furthered with first differencing, so all variables will be uniformly different. At first difference, all variables are stationary at 5% significant level. Hence, it can be said that all variables are stationary and do not have unit root.
This is the result for var-like order selection. The result from EViews shows the selection criterion of var-like order. Since the data used is an annually data, hence 1 or 2 lag is the optimal lag to use. The first column represents the number of lag by comparing the lowest value of AIC, SC, and HQ. AIC is chosen since it has the lower value which is 100.8383 at lag 2. Hence, the optimal lag length for the model is 2 and the best criterion for the model is AIC. So, this is the result of Johansen co-integration test. According to the first column, it shows none at most 1, at most 2, at most 3, at most 4, at most 5, and at most 6. None indicates that economic growth does not have any relationship with the independent variables. At most 1 to at most 6 shows the number of independent variables that have the relationship with economic growth. From both tables of the result, there are at least 5 co-integrating relationships between the consumption of petroleum products and economic growth since the value of 5% critical value is lower than the value of trace statistic and the maximum eigenstatistic value. For Granger causality test, from the result, there is a unidirectional causal relationship between GDP and LPG, GDP and diesel, and GDP and motor petrol, since the p-value is less than 0.05. This fulfills the researcher expectation since transport system in Malaysia depends on motor petrol, hence it influencing economic growth. The remaining pairs of GDP and fuel oil, GDP and kerosene, and GDP and ATF and AV gas do not Granger cause each other since the p-value is greater than 0.05. Thus, any change in fuel oil, kerosene, and ATF and AV gas does not affect the economic growth.
In conclusion, this study aimed to investigate the number of co-integrated relationships between petroleum product consumption and economic growth. Also, to examine the causal relationship between petroleum product consumption and economic growth in Malaysia. Due to this action, the stationary series were checked using ADF and PP tests. By using ADF tests, all variables are stationary at first difference except for motor petrol. For PP tests, all variables are stationary at first difference since the p-value is less than 0.05. Next, we obtained 2 optimal lag after performing var-lag order selection. Then, by using Johansen co-integration test, it is found that at least 5 petroleum product consumption co-integrate with economic growth. Lastly, from Granger causality test result, there are unidirectional for the relationship between economic growth and LPG, diesel, and motor petrol. However, there is no directional for the relationship between economic growth and fuel oil, kerosene, and ATF and AV gas. This proves that fuel oil, kerosene, ATF, and AV gas are independent to economic growth. There are some recommendations that should be highlighted for any further research. Firstly, some researchers can increase the number of data. Increasing the data by taking quarterly data will be more effective in determining the influence of petroleum product consumption towards economic growth. Second recommend is by adding some independent variables in the research. The other type of energy such as natural gas, coal and coke, and electricity can be added as variables. Third, the researcher can add another method like vector error correction model (VECM). This method is used to examine the long-run and short-run relationship between dependent and independent variables. The output can determine whether the petroleum products have positive or negative impact on economic growth in the short-run and long-run relationship. Lastly, for a better result, any further research can do comparison with other countries. Further research can discover the influence of petroleum product consumption of other countries and compare to the economic growth in Malaysia. That's all from us. Thank you.